All right, welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about the future of sex.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah, we're diving into the final chapter of Sex at Dawn. It looks at how human sexuality is changing so rapidly, and, well, some of their predictions for the future are pretty wild.
Oh yeah, this chapter, it doesn't just throw data at you. It really tries to get you thinking about what all this means for you. Like, what kind of choices will you face?
Definitely. It feels like we're at a crossroads.
Right.
Like the old rules are
Okay.
gone. The book talks about how moving away from, like, the farm life and stuff, uncoupled sex from just survival.
Right. And that's given us more choices, but it's also led to, well, a lot of confusion. We're kind of caught between these like ancient evolutionary drives, the stuff we've had for thousands of years, and this like explosion of options we have now. I mean, think about it. For most of human history, finding a partner was all about like getting resources, making sure your kids survived. But now, contraception, changing society, those pressures are gone.
So how do those old instincts, the evolutionary drives, how do they work now when the old rules don't apply? I mean, the book mentions these statistics about marriage and birth rates declining, but also singles are on the rise. And millennials and Gen Z, they're actually having LSS sex than earlier generations.
It's wild, right? And it's not just kids being kids. This is a huge societal shift. The economy's a factor. People are putting off marriage and families. Things are unstable financially. And technology, well, it's changed how we connect, right? New ways to be intimate, but maybe it makes face-to-face stuff harder. And gender roles are evolving too. More women are getting educated, having careers, and that changes relationships.
And then there's the thing everyone's using, dating apps. It's like the new sexual marketplace. But the book argues they're making things, well, kind of unbalanced.
Yeah, it's almost like a digital meat market, some people say. Have you heard that 6 meme? It's funny, but it shows how dating apps can make people expect too much. Someone average in real life might get totally overlooked when you're swiping and filtering.
I've heard people joke about that.
Yeah.
But it's deeper than just looks, right? This book says apps often reward certain traits, looks, height, income. And that can lead to a lot of frustration. For men and women.
Totally. And men especially, they have lower match rates. They feel more pressure to make the first move. This whole online thing can make guys feel more insecure about like being a man and dating. It's not just about finding a date. It's like navigating a whole new set of rules.
So we've got this clash, our primal instincts versus the digital age, changing roles for men and women, and this pressure to find the one when there are so many options. So where do we go from here? Well, this book tries to predict the future, and they lay out 4 types of scenarios: projected, probable, possible, and even preposterous.
It's not like they're trying to tell the future, though. These categories are more about, like, exploring possibilities, looking at trends and saying, what if this keeps going? It gets us thinking critically about what might shape love and sex in the future.
Okay, so the projected scenario is the most straightforward. Things basically keep going the way they are. Marriage sticks around, but more people stay single. But then we get into the probable scenarios, and that's where it gets interesting.
One they talk about is single supremacy. What if more and more people choose to be single? What if living alone becomes normal? Would society adapt? Would there be support systems for single people? Would we completely change what a good life looks like where romantic relationships aren't the main thing anymore?
It makes you wonder, would that make us even more reliant on technology to connect? And would that just make the problems with online dating even worse? Would people feel more lonely and isolated? Or could it be a chance to, I don't know, break free from expectations and find self-worth in new ways?
That's the question, right? Would single supremacy be like a dystopia, everyone isolated in their little virtual worlds? Or could it be a chance for self-discovery, deeper friendships, finding fulfillment outside of romantic relationships? This book doesn't give easy answers, but it brings up some really thought-provoking stuff.
Then there's the total opposite, a
Yeah.
trad renaissance. Could we swing back towards like the traditional family structure? What would need to happen for that?
For a trad renaissance to happen, well, we'd need a big cultural shift. Like first, we'd have to rethink the benefits of long-term monogamy. Then the economy would have to change so families could actually thrive on one income.
Because right now, both parents working is basically essential for most families. Would women want to go back to a more traditional role? Could society support that model? Seems like a lot would have to change for that to happen.
Yeah, a lot would have to change. And it raises tough questions about like gender roles and equality. Would this mean women losing ground in the workforce? Or could we find some new model that balances traditional values with what women want today? It's a tricky balance.
Okay, so we've got single supremacy and trad renaissance. Then the book throws in a curveball, polygyny redux.
Yeah.
The idea that a small group of men end up with multiple partners or wives, it's a little unsettling.
It's definitely provocative. Historically, polygamy has often been about control and power imbalances. For it to work in a modern context, we'd need a huge change in how we view relationships and power. Could it ever be truly equal? What happens to the people who are left out?
It raises a lot of ethical questions and logistical ones too. And what about the men who aren't part of that? The book even mentions the possibility of, like, a male revolution if a small group of men control access to women.
That's where they draw a parallel to chimpanzees. Male chimps are known to rebel against the alpha males who try to dominate the group. It's a reminder that human behavior is complex, and a lot of it's driven by these deep evolutionary instincts. So how would men react to a system that limited their options? It's definitely something to think about.
To round out the probable scenarios, we've got bonobo bonanza. Humans basically embrace casual sex.
This is like the opposite of polygyny redux. Some people argue that being more like bonobos would be good, less conflict, more social bonding. But the book says that might be wishful thinking. Humans have evolved to form pair bonds and attachments. Can we just flip a switch and change that?
But didn't the free love movement in the 60s and 70s try something similar?
Yeah, they did. And the book points out that while it had good intentions, there were problems. The increase in STDs and the instances of abuse showed that even in open relationships, you need clear boundaries and consent.
So it seems like bonobo bonanza, while an interesting idea, might be more fantasy than reality. So we've covered the projected and the probable, and those are already mind-blowing. But now we get into the possible scenarios, the ones that depend on new discoveries or things we just can't predict.
Yeah, these are the scenarios that really stretch the imagination. We're talking about advances in technology, major cultural shifts, even changes to human biology itself.
We're about to go deep down the rabbit hole, folks. Get ready. It's going to get wild.
Okay, so buckle up. The first possible scenario is a big one. It's like a total cultural shift in how we view sex and relationships. Like, what if we moved beyond monogamy, but not toward just casual sex? What if it was something completely new?
Wow, that's a big idea. Could we really come up with a totally different way of thinking about love and intimacy? One that fits with modern life and gets rid of all those old evolutionary hang-ups?
Well, the book doesn't say exactly what this new model would be, but it challenges us to imagine it. What if we changed how we define commitment and partnership? What if individual freedom was important, but so is deep connection? What if emotional intimacy and personal growth mattered more than getting married and having kids? It's a pretty mind-blowing concept.
I can see how that would be exciting, but also scary. It would take a huge change in our values and expectations. Speaking of huge changes, the book then talks about the impact of technology.
Technology.
Yeah.
Where science fiction becomes reality, right? The book looks at a few different tech advancements that could completely change things. Like, what about super advanced remote sex toys, where partners can actually stimulate each other from far away?
We already have teledildonics, but the book is talking about a future where these things are so real and they work with virtual reality. Like, you could blur the lines between physical and virtual intimacy.
Exactly. Imagine sharing a sensual experience with someone across the world, and it feels like they're right there with you. It makes you wonder, could technology make physical presence less important in relationships?
And then there's sex bots. They're not just fantasy anymore. The book talks about AI companions that could provide physical intimacy, A&D emotional support, and companionship.
There are a lot of ethical issues there. Could people really form attachments to machines? Would sex bots lead to more objectification of women? Would they create unrealistic expectations for human partners? Or could they be a source of companionship and intimacy for people who have a hard time finding it in the real world?
It's like that movie Her, but even more complex. The book also mentions body modifications and genetic engineering. Now we're going really far down the rabbit hole.
Imagine being able to customize your body, like to make sexual pleasure more intense, or even change how you look to match your desires. They talk about implanted vibrators, surgery to make nerve endings more sensitive, even 3D printed body parts.
It seems like the line between biology and technology would get really blurry. And then there's transhumanism, the idea of combining human consciousness with technology. If we could upload our minds, would we even need bodies anymore? Would we still feel sexual desire?
That's a big question for philosophers and futurists. Would a mind without a body still crave intimacy and connection? How would we express those feelings in a digital world? It challenges our whole understanding of what it means to be human and to feel desire.
It's hard to even wrap your head around it. And then there's radical life extension, maybe even immortality. How would that change relationships? If death wasn't a factor anymore, would till death do us part even mean anything?
It's a wild thought, right? If relationships could last for centuries, would we still value monogamy? Would people want to experience different partners over such a long lifespan? Or would the connection and shared experiences just get deeper and more meaningful over time? It makes you think about what commitment and love really mean in a world where there's no end.
And let's not forget IVG, in vitro gametogenesis, the technology that could let anyone have children, no matter their biological sex or fertility.
Imagine same-sex couples having biological children together, or women conceiving without a partner. It could completely change family structures and what it means to be a parent.
But it also raises a lot of ethical questions. What about consent when you're creating children from people who are deceased? Could IVG lead to designer babies? Would it make social inequality worse? It's a powerful technology that could do a lot of good, but also a lot of harm.
Exactly. These possible scenarios aren't just about cool tech, they're about the ethical and social consequences. How do we use these technologies responsibly? Who gets access to them? These are the questions we need to start thinking about now before they become reality.
Okay, so we've got cultural shifts, crazy tech, maybe even immortality. And then, just for fun, the book throws in the preposterous scenario. Sex becomes irrelevant to humans.
Yeah, that one's a head scratcher. It's hard to imagine given how important sex is to our biology and culture.
Could we really evolve beyond something that's so fundamental? The book suggests that maybe, in some distant future, if technology can meet all our needs and desires, sex might become as outdated as floppy disks.
It's a funny thought and probably not very likely, but it reminds us that we can't predict the future perfectly. There could be things we haven't even imagined yet.
So we've gone from single supremacy to a possible trad renaissance. We've talked about polygyny redux and all this amazing and sometimes scary technology and even immortality. That's a lot to take in. What really stood out to you from all these scenarios?
I think the most important thing isn't which scenario is most likely, but the bigger picture. The future of sex and relationships is constantly changing. It's being shaped by technology, economics, culture, things we can only partly control.
But, like you said before, we're not just along for the ride. We have choices. Our values, our decisions, our actions on the Lancity, they all help shape the future.
Exactly. We can question things, challenge things, imagine different possibilities. We can have open and honest conversations about what we want from sex and relationships and how to navigate this crazy world.
And that brings us back to the listener, to you.
Right.
You've explored all these potential futures, some probable, some preposterous, but in the end, it's up to each person to decide what makes sense to them, what kind of future they want to help create.
It's a very personal question. What are your values when it comes to love and intimacy? How do you see technology affecting your relationships? Are you excited about the possibilities or worried about them? These are questions worth thinking about.
It's like we've been looking through a kaleidoscope, all these different futures, each with its own challenges and opportunities.
And that's really what the book is trying to do. Not give us one definitive answer, but show us the possibilities, get us ready for whatever might happen. The future of sex and relationships is going to keep changing, and the more we understand what's driving those changes, the better we can navigate them.
Going through all this, I'm realizing how much the time and culture we live in shapes our ideas about love and sex and relationships. I wonder what things we consider normal today will seem totally outdated to future generations.
It's interesting to think about. Look how much attitudes toward premarital sex or same-sex relationships or even divorce have changed in just the last few decades. What seems radical now might be completely normal in the future.
That's why it's important to have these conversations, right? To challenge what we think we know, to be open to new ideas, to approach the future with curiosity instead of fear.
Absolutely. The book is encouraging us to really think about the choices we make, both as individuals and as a society. What kind of future do we want? What values are important to us? It's a call to action, a reminder that we're not just watching the evolution of relationships, we're part of it.
Of all these scenarios, is there one that you find especially interesting, one you feel drawn to, or maybe even a little worried about?
You know, the one that really gets me thinking is that complete cultural shift. The idea of moving beyond traditional monogamy and creating something totally new, something that really fits our needs and desires today. It's both exciting and kind of scary, you know?
I get that. It's like a blank slate. So much potential, but also a lot of unknowns. It would take a lot of courage to let go of the old ways and try something new. But maybe that's what we need to do to create a future where love and intimacy can thrive in all their different forms.
Maybe. And it's not just about romantic relationships. This book also makes you think about all kinds of human connection. Friendships, family, community. How will those change? What will technology's role be? It's a huge, complex topic, and we can't know for sure what will happen. But one thing's for sure, it's going to be a fascinating ride.
That's a great way to put it. We've explored some pretty heavy stuff today. Single supremacy, polygyny redux, sex bots, even immortality. But I hope at the end of the day, this deep dive has left you feeling more informed, more engaged, and maybe even a little more optimistic about the future.
I agree. The future is uncertain, but there are so many possibilities. If we keep having these conversations, challenge our own thinking, and stay open to new perspectives, we can help create a future where love, intimacy, and human connection can still flourish.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the future of sex. We'll be back next time with another fascinating topic. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and